So my clock is saying 2 o'clock, and that means that we can get started with the 14th of our Jewelry Industry Voices webinars. Good afternoon, or wherever you are in the world, good morning or good evening. It's nice to have you all with us. We have some of our regular attendees with us. Aloha, Brenda, again in the middle of the night. And thank you to everybody for joining us here again. It's so nice. We've been doing this since April the 22nd, the 14th, as I said, of these webinars, gathering people together around a different topic each week. And it's so nice to welcome you all in to this space to discuss the issues that we're all dealing with, the outcomes and the responses to how we deal with COVID-19. So as I said, as everybody is joining one by one into the room here today, welcome to this. This is the 14th of CIBJO's Jewelry Industry Voices webinars. That's with me, Edward Johnson, here in London, and also CIBJO's Head of Communications, Steve Benson, in Tel Aviv. Now, we expect this to last for 1 hour. As always, I have to make the announcement or the joke that we rarely seem to be hitting 1 hour, but that's because the conversation is always flowing. So if you do need to leave on the hour, please feel free to take your leave from the conversation. We may continue a little bit past the hour because we have a fantastic panel of experienced journalists and publishers with us today, and the conversation flows. So we don't like to stop it when we get to the hour. This series of webinars, which was started back in April, hosted by CIBJO, looks at the interest, or issues of interest, I should say, excuse me, in the jewelry business from the perspective of industry figures. Today, we're going to discuss the gem and jewelry trade media with journalists, editors, and publishers who keep our industry informed and updated on the industry news of the day. So we have a panel of renowned and award-winning journalists and publishers representing India, Israel, the UK, and USA. And they come from some of the leading publications in our trade. So before I introduce everybody's our speakers today, let's check in with Steve Benson in Tel Aviv. Good afternoon, Steve. How are you? Good afternoon, Steve.
Yeah,
how are you?
I'm sorry. Now I'm unmuted. You can hear me, correct?
Okay, yeah, it's good to hear you.
All right. I'm well, Ed. Thanks very much. I'm delighted actually to be part of the panel, though, with the panel here today, because in many respects, this is my world. I started my career in this business already more than 3 decades ago as a trade journalist, and grew up with some of the people on the panel. Just some of the technical details that we always give at the start of the event. We do encourage people to ask questions and to make opinions. If you have an opinion over here, you have the chat box, and you can use that. If you do want to ask a question, what we request is that you put the question into the Q&A box that you can find on your Zoom panel. We will try to get to all the questions that are asked to the best of our ability. In some cases, some of the speakers might actually decide to reply to you in writing. We will be recording. In fact, we already are recording, and the recording of this webinar will go up most probably tomorrow morning. That pretty much is it. Before we get on, I'd just like to invite Gaetano Cavalieri, the president of CIBJO, to say a few words, and then we can get started. Gaetano?
Thank you very much, Steve and Ed. And let me thank all the attendees first. And again, I join Ed in saying hello to the person which is with us from Honolulu every time. And I said one day that probably we have to all move to Honolulu to to go for a webinar, but for sure we will do that. I want to thank the panelists, and I want to thank the panelists because first of all, they are very professional and experienced journalists, and the role that they play is very important to us and the world. Why? Because they are journalists and the professionals that are bringing the issues to the public exactly as it is. And this is an element that, in my opinion, is important because this shows vision, culture, professionalism, transparency, and honesty, which you know, is something that is important. So I truly am very happy, proud, and honored to have all of you with us today. And I'm sure it will be a wonderful panel, a wonderful webinar, simply because you, ladies and gentlemen, and also because our attendees that are going to listen what you have to say. Thank you very much for being with us.
Great. Thank you very much, Gaetano, and thanks for hosting these. Let's get to the panelists now, and let's start with Rob Bates, Senior Editor and News Director for JCK Magazine and JCK Online. Rob is an award-winning New York-based journalist who has written about the diamond and jewelry industries for over 25 years. Rob, welcome to the conversation. I've been listening to your podcast, so I know you've escaped with your family out to New Jersey. Is that where you are today?
Yes, that's where I am right now. Yeah.
Great. It's nice to have you with us. And
not Honolulu, but yes.
No, not Honolulu. Nice to have you with us. Thanks for your time today. Next to Avi Kravitz. Avi has over 12 years of experience covering the diamond and jewelry industry from Rappaport's headquarters in Israel. Avi, I once went to a talk where you introduced yourself as Lenny's long-lost cousin. You were joking about that, right?
Yeah, it was more an expression of what I wish might have been than the reality, and it's kind of an ongoing family joke. But I think the next generation is now talking about Zoe being our long-lost relation, and she's more connected to the jewelry industry anyway. So I'll take Zoe as well.
It's great to have you with us. Thank you so much, Avi. Nice to chat to you today. And next, let's turn, if we can, to Samit Bhatta. Samit is the co-owner of Retail Jeweler Media and the publisher of the Retail Jeweler magazine. Since 2010, Samit has been the owner of this new media and events organization for the Middle East and Indian markets. And prior to this, Samit had a successful sales and marketing career in India and the Middle East with companies such as De Beers, Damas, and DMCC. Samit, it's so nice to see you today and joining us with some nice Indian vibrancy and color there.
Thank you very much, Ed, for that introduction, and great to be here and looking forward.
Thank you. And last, definitely not least, from my own home country, Rachel Taylor. Rachel is a freelance jewelry journalist, but also a co-founder of the Jewelry Cut, which is a very important platform that supports independent jewelry designers here in the UK and across Europe. Rachel, good afternoon to you. Where are you today?
Afternoon, Edward. I am in Brighton, which is just about an hour outside of London, and I'm back in the office, which is really great. I've been doing that for a few weeks, and it's really nice. And currently in a sort of strange kind of soundproof booth.
Well, you sound great from where we're sitting. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for taking time away from the beach in Brighton to be with us today. So let's get started with some questions. Before we do that, please note that none of the opinions or the information offered during this webinar constitutes any legal or financial or any official advice. CIBJO provides a global perspective on the challenges that we're all facing. So for more precise information and support, we encourage you to play an active part in your local trade associations, and also to seek advice relevant to your location and business. And I should also add, please support and read and attend functions by your local trade media as well, and support your local trade media in all the areas where they're operating. Let's get to some questions for these guys today. Avi, can we start and turn to you, thinking about the diamond supply chain in these challenging times? How has COVID-19 affected rough diamond supply, but also polished demand?
Hi, thanks, Ed. It's you know, when demand from the consumer level drops to such an extent that it has, the one tool that's immediately at the industry's disposal is to limit supply, and that was the initial reaction that manufacturers who buy rough stopped buying rough, and they were given a certain amount of leeway from the mining companies. And also, it's not been easy to physically have those sales of rough diamonds. So overall, there's been a pretty dramatic drop in rough sales, which has affected the revenue stream of the mining companies. And it's helped the manufacturers maintain a certain level of polished inventory. You know, going into the crisis, you know, through 2019, there was an issue of oversupply in the market, and since there hasn't been that additional manufacturing, it's helped the midstream manufacturers and dealers cope with maintain a lower level of inventory. But at the same time, we aren't seeing much vibrancy at all in the polished market, and trading has declined to a similar extent. There isn't much activity going on in the bourses, and there's certain limitations also in shipping goods, in sourcing goods if there is a need. So it's a challenging market, certainly on the demand side. But there is an effort to reduce supply that would help try to keep some sort of a balance out there.
And yesterday in your, I think it's a quarterly webinar, you put out your Diamond Trends with Avi Kavitz's webinar on the Rappaport platform. You talked around some of these issues for an hour. So I guess if people wanted to know more about that, they can visit Rappaport website and watch a recording of that presentation yesterday.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. We will be posting that online in the coming days, probably early next week, but that is available. I don't want to speak for an hour on the topic now. I could, but it wouldn't be fair. But there's a lot going on in the market, and both from a supply and demand and a pricing point of view, affecting the trade.
Well, that's okay. One of my jobs is to make sure you don't speak for an hour, but we'll move quickly along. And of course, Rappaport known for your price guides, and update us a little bit on how polished pricing has been affected as well during this time.
Yeah, it's been an interesting sort of thing to watch, because you know, initially there was a pretty sharp decline in polished prices, but in the second quarter and continuing into July, we're actually seeing some firming of prices, and that's not coming from the demand side. You know, ideally, in a healthy market, polished prices would increase when there's an increase in consumer demand or demand through the supply chain, but that's not happening, obviously. So the other factors involved, including scarcities in certain areas because there's been no manufacturing. You know, the difficulty to ship goods is making The difficulty to ship goods is making the market more localized. And when you have to source goods locally, there's less options, which helps support prices as well. You know, if a supplier knows that the buyer doesn't have a lot of choice, he can maintain a certain price level. And there's certain other factors that are helping to support prices, even though demand has declined substantially.
Again, you know, you could talk for a whole hour on that. So thank you for the brief answer there. Let's move on, if we can, and think about the retail market for jewelry generally. And let's turn to the largest retail jewelry market in the world, which is the US. So Rob, if I can bring you in, during this difficult time, how has the US, the very important US retail sector, how's it fared so far?
I think it's not as bad as people have feared. I think obviously the big challenge is that, you know, the United States is still very much in dealing with the coronavirus. So there's certain areas that are in real trouble right now and are probably going to have to close down, or people are going to be afraid to go outside. So we're not where we hoped we would be at this point, which is, you know, kind of that V-shaped recovery. So in that way, I think it's extremely challenging, and, you know, certain parts of the country are doing better than other parts of the country, like where I am. You know, there is serious talk about opening up, but I just think that everybody is still pretty cautious about going out and buying, because it's, you know, you're kind of, you know, you're either in the middle of it, or you haven't been affected by it, or you're recovering from it. But everybody is kind of dealing with this situation that unfortunately is really, really bad in certain areas of the country, and is probably going to get worse before it gets better, as Antoinette said. So I think people are buying. There was, I think, in the beginning, when certain stores opened up, there was pent-up demand. I think certain stores are doing well. I think people have adjusted with video tools, but it's definitely going to be challenging for the rest of the year.
Yeah. Do you think that this crisis, and of course we're going to have a resultant and economic difficulty globally, and especially in the States, do you think that these times provide more incentive perhaps for people to buy laboratory grown diamonds? You know, or maybe, you know, the Natural Diamond Council, they clearly hope that this period is defining the difference between the natural and the synthetic product in the diamond market. Where do you see demand for laboratory grown this time?
From what I hear, it's doing okay. You know, natural diamonds are doing okay. I think really the you know, when this gets over with, or begins to get over with, you know, the industry is going to have the same challenges that it had prior to going in there, and there was certainly huge challenges as far as, you know, demand, you know, making the product attractive and exciting to a new generation, making the industry more diverse, which is now a big topic over here. So definitely the same challenges exist. I think lab grown is pretty well positioned, given that it's a, you know, more value oriented product. So I think coming out of this, I think they have an opportunity to take a little bit even more market share, but they've been extremely, extremely quiet. So they haven't really promoted themselves. And yeah, I mean, obviously the natural diamond industry has an ability to make a case for itself. And I think the question is, I don't think it's a sense of, are these products well positioned? I think they are well positioned. I think the question is, do you make the case for yourself? Do you get out there? Do you market? And that's been the problem for the industry for a long time, has been that there hasn't been this kind of the marketing that built the industry for years and years hasn't been there for the last decade. So in that way, you know, it's just a matter of, yeah, is it possible people will want diamonds at the end of the year, you know, to express all the emotions they've been feeling? Sure, but you have to make the case. You just can't, you know, people aren't just sitting around thinking about diamonds. So you have to make sure that you speak to people in a way that's effective and works and is noticeable.
And thinking about that, you know, having to make the case, you mentioned there that the laboratory grown sector has been quite quiet during this time. I mean, you write about them a lot, and they seem to come up in questions and conversation a lot in the industry. I mean, compared to their actual demand, do you think we talk too much about them?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think it's, I think that's the mentality of this industry, is that it gets very focused on one thing and then kind of moves on to another thing and to another thing to another thing. Yeah, I think, I mean, we probably do talk about them a little too much, but it's a, you know, I hate this phrase because it's so cliched, but you know, it's something of a disruptor to the traditional industry. And it's, you know, it is something. There are now two kinds of diamonds out there, right? And you know, diamonds, the natural gem diamond never really had a competitor for what it did. It was always on its own. So the question is, how does it make itself kind of, you know, how does it differentiate itself in a way that's hopefully not antagonistic, which is what we've seen kind of originally. So we probably do talk about them a little too much. And but I think it's an interesting topic, and I think it's been a challenge for the industry. And I do think the natural industry has a very good case to make for itself, and it just has to make that case.
Yeah, yeah, consistent messaging, I think, and that was, Avi, something you were talking about, is everybody needs to play a role in this, in the consistent messaging and the positive impact that the natural diamond industry makes to society. Moving on, if I can, thanks, Rob, and Rachel, if I can turn to you, you know, through your event, the Jewelry Cut Live, which, if I can say bravely, you're planning to put on in September here at the Royal Institution in London. I'm looking forward to it personally. But anyway, during those events, you champion small independent jewelry designers, mainly from the UK and Europe. How has the pandemic affected that group of jewelers?
Obviously, there are exceptions, but actually a lot of them have done really well during lockdown, because a lot of them are independent, they don't have stores, they don't have staff, therefore there's none of the big sort of crushing overheads that really put a dent in people's businesses when they've had to shut down. They've been able to kind of continue as they were. Obviously, there's been issues with production, but again, if they're kind of working at that smaller scale, it's just been a case of perhaps changing where they would normally go to get something plated or to get a gemstone set, and having that agility to do so. For them also, they tend to have quite good engagement with the end customer. So some will go through sort of wholesale and other retailers, but a lot of them do direct sales, whether that's through Instagram or through their own website. So they actually kind of had this channel already developed. So for them, it's not necessarily been quite as destructive as it perhaps has been for the bigger brands.
Yeah, and they've been able to continue working. I remember in the first weeks talking to a friend of mine who's a small independent jewelry designer, and she was just going into a workshop in Hatton Garden as normal because she's not in a large space with lots of other people where the rules were different. So they were able to continue with production. But for the larger UK economy and for the jewelry business, the UK has been reopening since middle of June when stores could reopen. How have you heard in your discussions with retailers, how has traffic and business been so far?
I think it's again been mixed. I speak to lots of different people about this, and some people said as soon as the doors opened, they were rushing in, they sold through all the stock they've been holding on to and are now starting to reorder. Other people have said it's a bit more cautious and quiet. Again, I think this really comes down, I think sort of like the great divide in lockdown retail is really digital, and those who have had good websites have continued to do well, but have also been able to communicate to their customers that they are open, that they do have, you know, safety precautions in place. For those that haven't, I think those that perhaps after this sort of period of no footfall and no customers have then just opened their doors expecting people to come back, they haven't had that same reaction. I think it's the ones that have kept the conversation going throughout lockdown that are starting to see customers come back and do well.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn to India and thinking about India and especially the jewelry demand from the consumer. Sumit, what have been the big changes that you've seen in consumer demand in India?
So one of the biggest worries, from India was that once it opens up, and it was opened up in the month of June. And one of the worries was that people will come back and try and sell the gold which they have to, during a pandemic. But it happened the opposite. From June 1st to June 28th, which was the wedding season, we had good sales. In fact, south of India and north of India saw a lot of customers coming in and buying jewelry. And we saw that for wedding jewelry, the percentage of jewelry for a wedding budget, the percentage of jewelry which was bought before maybe 30-35%, but it grew to 50 to 60%, which is a good sign, because what is happening is over the last 10 years or so, we felt that the millennials or the people who are getting married were moving away from jewelry and were spending their budgets on other things for weddings. But after the pandemic, they understand the enduring value of gold and diamonds and gemstones. And now they are listening maybe to the parents and buying more of gold and diamonds and gemstones for their marriage purposes. As you know, India, that out of the total jewelry business, 70% comes from the wedding market. Yeah. So that's a very positive sign which we have seen. And on the other side, which is a 30% of the market, which is like your everyday wear, we are seeing the need for more design-led pieces rather than mass everyday wear, because somewhere minimalism is finding favor over materialism. This pandemic has really taught people that it is not necessary that if you consume more, you will be more happier. So you'd rather have lesser pieces, but better, meaningful pieces. So for design and designers, it's a huge cue that going forward, we'll need better pieces even in smaller price points.
Yeah, we've seen a return to that slogan that De Beers came up with after the 2008 financial crash, which I remember was fewer, better things. And we've seen that, having a little dust off and being returned to the slogan marketplace, haven't we, recently? But can I turn again to you, Sumit, for some insight into the rough diamond market in India? Of course, the main processing center for polished diamonds globally. And the Indian diamond manufacturers declared a moratorium on rough imports. And that was in order to stabilize the market, so they said. Was this successful, and where do things stand at present?
So this moratorium on rough has been very, very successful and good for the industry, because as soon as the lockdown was announced, for 2 months, all the factories shut down, markets had shut down. And people are sitting on a lot of polished goods anyways. There were very good buying which happened in January and February. So when the markets opened up, especially China, and Hong Kong, the exports started happening in a very nice way, in a very good way from the month of June. And even now it's happening very well. So the pipeline is getting eased, of the polished goods movement. And people are not sitting on so much of polished now. And so they are starting back to cut and polish the rough which they had bought and which were not cut. And we feel in India that the migrant labor issue, which was a big issue in India when the lockdown happened and people went back to their villages and the smaller towns where they come from, they are yet to return back to Surat in Gujarat or in Bombay, where cutting and polishing actually happens. So we are seeing a level of 25 to 30% of factories running capacities. And it should start getting better from August first week, when there'll be more and more of the workforce comes back to the factories. And I think the first virtual site of Alrosa is end of this month, and the next one is end of the next month. And even the De Beers sites are going to start from next month. And people are being very, very positive now for the rest of the year.
Good. Okay, thank you. Well, let's stay with you, Sumit, but let's jump into the future, or the present and the future, especially how we reimagine the future of jewelry coming out of this period. Last month, we had Mithun Sacchetti from Carrot Lane on the podcast, on the webinar, and he talked about a substantial increase in e-commerce traffic in India for both Carrot Lane and the holding company Tanishq during the pandemic. What do you see happening right now with retail and especially e-commerce in India? And what do you see as the main trends that are emerging?
So in India, it has been very interesting pandemic to say. The new opportunity has come up where we are seeing the retailers adapt to the consumer needs, because jewelry has been a passion for Indians, and gold is almost second nature to women here in India. We are seeing that omni-channel retailing is coming up in a big way, where your sale could start online and finish at the store, or it could start in store and finish it online. This is what is happening in India, and jewelers are adapting so fast that what they're doing is they have actually come up with concepts of things called video calling to show the jewelry. So in India, for a marriage, there could be like 2-3 families, buying together. So they are doing video calls where 3 families are sitting on the other side and they're seeing the jewelry. And once they shortlist the pieces, so say if they shortlist 25 pieces out of 100, there is a special chauffeur-driven, sanitized vehicle with the store manager and couple of sales staff who go to the homes of the customers and show the jewelry there, and that transaction is finalized, and they come back, leaving the pieces which they have bought, and there's a bank transaction which happens for the payment. This is really helping the trade to warm up to the new consumer demands, because the consumer is not really up to coming to the store. They would rather have as less as possible human contact.
That's
so
really
one of the biggest trends.
That's really interesting. So you're saying it's a chauffeur-driven home try-on service, basically, that some jewelers are using. What sort of price points are they hitting with the jewelry they're selling that way?
So these are mainly for wedding kind of jewelry. So it's about 10 lakhs, so around say $20,000 up, is what they are looking to send this jewelry, because in India, that's a very large business. That's a very big market. And most of it is being done by the independent jewelers. So in India, the independent jewelers are the ones who sell this high-end or high design pieces. And they are doing all the things possible to go as per what the customer is looking for, So the high-end pieces are doing very well. The everyday wear is now started to sell from e-commerce platforms. So if what he told you, Mithun told you when he was here, there is a day in India in the summer of India called Akshaya Tritiya, which is the second biggest day for gold jewelry buying after Diwali. And on that day, during that day, for 10 days, Tanishq had an offer of buying your gold and fixing your gold price, and then you making it into jewelry after the lockdown gets over. They had sales equivalent to entire year's sale of 2019 within 10 days.
I remember Mithun telling us about that. That's incredible. 1 year's sales in 1 day. That was in April, that holiday, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
That's great. Rachel, you had something to add. You're on mute. I'm going to get that t-shirt.
I knew that was going to happen at some point. No, I was just going to jump in and say, actually, we've had a bit of that in London as well. So with the kind of delivering jewels to the home. So there's a retailer called Hirsch, which again is very high end. They specialize in unusual gemstones, but they've created a branded London taxi, which can either take jewels to you to look at home, or will also take customers to the store. But I think that's a really interesting idea, and hopefully we'll see a bit more of that in future.
That's great. Thank you for highlighting that. An innovative use of a London taxi. Sumit, we were thinking about demand, and what's so important in India and the Middle East is, well, firstly the wedding season around Diwali, and then Eid in the Middle East afterwards as well. Where do you forecast consumer demand going? I know you've said that it's positive, but what sort of figures can you feel that people are looking at?
So I know as we now move forward towards the main season, which starts on October first week, and Diwali is on November 14th here, and Eid is just after that in Middle East. The demand as of now, it's around 25% or so than last year. But the general feeling is that between October and December, which is the third quarter, we'll see sales of around 40% in Middle East, and India should see around 50% till December. And then Jan to March, the last quarter of this financial year, we'll see around 70% sales, than last year. So that's the hope, which is really positive, and people are really preparing very, very well for this season. We are seeing a lot of virtual shows happening now, online B2B shows starting next month, and people are also seeing the high design jewelry pieces which they want to stock up. So there is a movement which is happening. The only challenge is the migrant labor and the workers, who make the jewelry. They are returning from only August first week. So the manufacturing time is that delayed by almost 1 month. So what normally we saw the goods reaching the showrooms by say September, it will now reach by October first week. That is the only thing.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn again to the diamond supply chain, and Avi, if we can bring you back into the conversation. We know there's been a lot that's been said about diamond price lists, especially at the start of the crisis, and we, without getting into the details of all of that, do you believe that the business or the companies that are providing diamond price lists, is this a business that's likely to change post-COVID?
Yeah, it was a hot topic when the crisis began. Primarily as Rappaport reduced prices in late March, but what we've seen is that that sort of critique has kind of died down, and it's not really about necessarily the price list. The price list itself isn't a business. It's really it's in a way a brand and an opinion of the publisher of where prices are, and we're very careful to stress that point. And like everything else, it's a matter of being able to trust that opinion. And so what we, when in the initial aftermath of the price change, there were different initiatives, mainly to create new trading platforms and other and different trading platforms, which I think is a healthy thing. That is good. It's good that there are more avenues for people to trade and sell diamonds. And the other point that was made was that that the system of trading diamonds via a discount needs to change, and that people should introduce quote their diamonds on a dollar amount. What I feel, and what is that discount method encourages trading. It encourages negotiating in the dealer market, and that's really the aim of the price list, is to facilitate trading, and the discount system plays into that, and so people want. I believe that moving forward, people will always want that wiggle room, that there isn't there is room to there is a bid and an ask price, and somewhere in between, that's where we meet, because that's the beat of the diamond trade, that it's an entrepreneurial trade, and people are traders. They negotiate, and that's what the discount system enables.
And Rob, you had something.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of talk about price lists. I think we're in an interesting time in that, obviously, the Rappaport price list is extremely important and influential. And if it wasn't, you wouldn't have seen the reaction that it got when he lowered prices. Though I do think, I think, and I don't think this is big news to anybody, that most traders get their price information from a variety of sources, whether it's Blue Nile, whether it's James Allen. They go on the web, they go on RapNet, they go on some of the other, they'll go on Get Diamonds now. So I think that people get their price information from a variety of sources. And is it, one of the interesting things that I've discovered over the years is that a lot of commodities have what I should probably call kind of idiosyncratic price lists that are very similar to Rappaport, in that, sometimes it is just one person's opinion or one company's opinions that's just kind of that the industry just gradually accepts. So it's not that unusual, but I do think there is possibility for a more transparent price list that has a, that is less kind of idiosyncratic, that you kind of understand a little bit better what's going on behind the scenes. And I think Martin has indicated he wants to move in that direction, which is great. And so I think there is room for that. And I think there's also room in the lab-grown sector, just as far as developing a pricing scheme. It doesn't have to be necessarily this kind of $800 a carat thing that Lightbox is doing, but involving, developing something that is less confusing to the consumer, that makes a certain amount of logical sense, which I don't think, you just, whenever a consumer tries to price diamonds, they just get lost in, the 4 C's. I mean, it becomes a huge time-consuming process, and maybe that's in a way deliberate to from the trade to keep everybody kind of a little off base. But I think I would at some point like to see us go to a more kind of standardized, logical system for both, for polished prices, just as a sense of, that's transparent. I think there's a lot of room for change there.
Yeah. Steve.
I have tremendous, Martin actually gave me my start in the business. So, I think he's a brilliant and extremely ethical man. So, I think he's rethinking everything. I mean, everybody has to rethink everything.
Yeah. Steve, you had a point to make, and then Avi.
Right, actually, I've got a point and a question of you. The point was actually, I'm just harking back to, we had a webinar a few weeks back on laboratory grown and natural diamonds. One of the speakers was Andrei Zarkov, who used to be president of Alrosa, but now runs a trading company working with laboratory grown diamonds. And he made the point that he thinks that we're in a transition phase. And in about 3 years' time over here, the idea of essentially benchmarking prices of laboratory grown diamonds against the price of natural, he thinks will be phased out, and they will start working on a more benchmark system within the laboratory grown diamond market itself. That I think was one of the key points that we took away from that specific webinar. My question, the question I was going to ask, and I think maybe certainly to Avi, but I mean, but I'm sure Rob has an opinion as well, and maybe Samet and Rachel also. There is a proliferation of large trading networks at the moment. I mean, the Rappaport runs one of the largest, where there is a tremendous amount of price information that, I mean, why have we not arrived at a place yet that this information is not properly aggregated and put out in the same way that a commodity market puts out information about average prices? Why do we still depend upon the opinion of, why does it have to go through the filter of somebody like Rap? Yeah, Avi.
Okay, so I'll respond to a number of points there, Steve. We actually have more than one list, and sometimes there's kind of a focus on the official RAP list, which is our opinion of high asking prices, and it's high asking prices that creates that discounting system. But we also publish on a weekly basis, and it's available on RAPnet as well, a price list, a list that shows the best and average asking prices on RAPnet, and that's probably the most effective guide for dealers in the market as to what prices are doing, and we've been quite open about how we look at discounts and what might influence our decision to go down in prices or up in prices. You know that discount goods should be trading in a range of you know, if it's hitting 40 below RAP or higher, you know, that should be a red flag for people. And so you know, we're an independent company, and again, that wrap list is our opinion of prices in the market, and I think that's a very important distinction to make, because what happens if a you know, if a trade organization, for example, if the WFTB gets together and sets prices, you know, it's a very fine line that we start to walk in terms of setting prices and price fixing, and people within the trade taking those setting those prices. And we're a service provider, and we're very careful to allow people to earn our trust in prices. And one of the ways we earn our trust is to reduce prices when prices go down, and it's often not a popular decision.
Yeah, we could talk about price lists for a long time, but there are important other issues, and thank you for that, Avi and Rob. But I want to talk to another important topic in the industry, is trade shows. And Rachel, you know, you're going to be putting on a gathering in a few months' time in London. But we've seen this explosion in the past few months of people being online and people using social media, and often they're finding their way to independent designers, such as those that you champion, without the need to go to a trade show or go to an event. I mean, does social media cut out events like trade shows or boutique shows like you're doing?
I think this has actually been happening for a long time, and perhaps longer than maybe the industry at large has been picking up on it. And I'm going to speak from a very UK perspective here, but in the UK market, for I think when we first saw Pandora, Thomas Sabo, Swarovski, those kind of brands, and everybody kind of jumped on it, and suddenly all these traditional family jewelers became branded stores effectively. And then we almost saw a swing away from that to where everybody is spent in recent years focusing on building up their own brands again by using fine jewelry and kind of unbranded, and almost the brands have sort of slipped away. But for all these independent jewelers who traditionally would have relied on being stocked in retail stores, if retailers then either wanted to buy those big name brands or shifted to fine jewelry, there's not been a place for them. Nobody's been buying them, so they've had no other option but to actually start, as I mentioned before, kind of building up these online networks and building up direct consumer routes. And actually, I think that's been going on in the background for a long time, but buyers, sort of store buyers, and here I mean kind of department stores perhaps, who still do buy in those kind of independent brands, you know, they're on Instagram all the time, and they're looking at these brands which suddenly have huge followings, which makes them more interesting, because if you know a designer has a big following, they're likely to have more sales. So yeah, I think I spoke to one buyer who said she's just not interested in going to trade shows anymore. She doesn't need to. She can find things online, she can direct message them, she can set up a private meeting, she can do all that. What she said to me that she wanted, and this is a very big department store in London, is she wants smaller curated events. So she kind of wants a selection of interesting things. She wants to see it in person. If she can do it all at once, great. But she doesn't need to spend, I don't know, 4 or 5 days wandering around a huge hall hoping to find something that's interesting. I think those days are sort of, I think there's still definitely a place for trade shows, because I think actually it's a place where we all meet up and we can all interact. I think that's so important. Do I think it's perhaps maybe more for the whole, like big wholesale market? Yes. For these independent designers or brands looking for independent designers, I think for them, they're looking from a trade show, it's something that they want to go to now. They're looking for experiences. And I think we've seen a few shows go down that more experiential route. So I don't think they're essential anymore. I think they need to be places that people and buyers want to go to.
Avi, you had a point to make.
Yeah, it's interesting, Rachel, to hear you talk from a buyer's point of view, because within the diamond trade, when we go to shows and we speak to exhibitors who are displaying their loose diamonds, and in some cases diamond jewelry, there's been this apathy in attending, in despondency in attending trade shows for some time, and people are very aware of spending the money to attend the shows. And one thing I've noticed within the diamond trading halls of the big shows, is that it's actually become a bit of a tech play. You know, it's not so much about exhibiting your diamonds. It's about the service that I can provide, and this is the cool technology that we've developed to enable the retailer to provide a service to the retail buyer. And so trade shows have changed for the diamond industry. But people were quite tired of them, I think, and there was a lot of talk about a lower attendance across the board throughout the calendar this year.
Yeah, Rob, you had a point to make.
Yeah, I mean, like Avi, I have a commercial interest in this topic. I would say that I agree with Rachel. I think there is a place for the trade to meet up and to discuss things. Perhaps not as much as we have done in the past, but you know, as much as we do these Zoom teleconferences, there's nothing like meeting somebody face to face. I believe in my heart. You know, we can do these things, and I've gotten used to these things, and they work now. But it really is much better, and I'm sure companies like them because they're happy not to send them, not to spend money on sending people places. But I do think there is something better in people meeting face to face. I think I think it just is it's a better experience. And certainly seeing jewelry face to face is very different than seeing it online. You know, I think it's something just about every independent retailer believes. So you know, personally, you know, I've been to a lot of shows, and it's not, you know, ordinarily it's not something that like got me like really excited. You know, I'd be like, oh my God. But now I'm kind of excited. You know, when we get back to normal, I'll be like thrilled to like, hey, go to Vegas and see everybody. I mean, I think it's going to be kind of an exciting thing. And where I do agree with Avi is that, yeah, the idea of like 30 diamond dealers coming over and selling the same stuff with no differentiation, that, you know, that doesn't necessarily make sense, certainly not in a trade show environment where people are competing against each other. So yeah, I think that the trade shows are going to be more for people with distinct things and with interesting things and with something different to offer. But for like a whole bunch of people to go with the same product, it's, you know, yeah, it doesn't make sense because you're just going to end up, you know, beating each other up on price.
And we've got a lot of people who want to join in on this. Avi, I think you were first.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of the above. But a point I wanted to make was that maybe COVID has thrown the trade shows a bit of a lifeline. You know, it's a difficult year, we know, in 2020 and maybe into 2021. But at some point, people are going to have a renewed enthusiasm, I think, about the shows.
Yeah.
And so maybe, you know, a year or two down the line, there's going to be that excitement again. I certainly miss seeing everyone at you know, at JCK this year, and it's something that the networking effect is much more powerful than the virtual experience. That's for sure.
Okay, Sumit and Rachel wanted to join in as well, but can you be brief because we've got some other important topics to talk about. Sumit, you had a point to make. If you can turn yourself off mute, please, Sumit.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Sorry. So, you know, in India, we really believe that, you know, in gold jewelry business, it is a very touch and feel business, you know, and the confidence of a face-to-face meeting is 100 times better than a virtual meeting. You know, we know trade shows actually contribute to more than 70 to 80% of B2B sales. You know, the days are gone when people go to different cities to meet people with the goods. It's not happening. You know, they only sell at trade shows. And even if they just get 4 to 5 new customers at each trade show, and we have like 4 or 5 of them in a year, big ones in India, although we have more than 66 trade shows in India, the top 4 or 5 are very, very important, you know, and they will remain. I think that that's the core of the business for the B2B level.
Great, thank you. Rachel, briefly, if you can.
Just to follow up, it was really interesting to hear sort of Rob and Abby kind of talk about that enthusiasm, but I think 2020 is the year that's killed trade shows. Has the jewelry industry stopped? Can we no longer sell jewelry? No, not at all. It's obviously we can get along completely fine without it, but yeah, it could, as they said, it could be a savior where people actually want to go again. And just to kind of refer back to like the jewelry cut is a very, I mean, this is not a trade show, it's a very small boutique thing, but I think what feedback we get from buyers is when they come, what they like about it is they know they're going to see brands they don't see anywhere else, and that everyone's a little bit different, and that's what they like. And maybe again that goes back to sort of going for shows that have exciting things or new things to look at as opposed to just kind of big wholesale markets.
Great, thank you. Listen, all very relevant trade shows, but I do want to talk about other things, and I want to, turn to you guys and your experience and thinking about how you communicate in a time of crisis. So thinking about that communication, Rob, in your opinion, what specifically has been the most interesting and relevant topic to cover in the past 4 months? And of course, that's under the headline of COVID, but what specific area?
Well, it was interesting because for the first couple of weeks after COVID, we became very service oriented, which we've been a very news oriented. At least the newsletter I do has been very news oriented. And then, when we realized just what a crisis it was, and that people were being put in this situation with nothing to do, we really started to do a lot more service pieces about PPP, about loans, about landlords, about things like that. And people actually responded extremely well to that. I think I feel that we did something of a service in that we provided information that was kind of tailored to the jewelry industry. And so, and it wasn't just us, obviously. There was like an explosion of webinars. There was so much helpful information. So I think obviously it's important to be helpful. There's a lot of negative information out there, and you can dwell on it. We try not to dwell on it too much because I don't think that really helps anybody. It just depresses people. But I would say obviously the big issues are COVID, and then kind of as a sub issue is what's going on with Black Lives Matters and some of these issues that are really kind of consuming the United States right now. So those have been big too. Those aren't, those are a little bit sometimes delicate to talk about, but those are probably the biggest.
And thinking about, all the stuff that you've been doing, Rob, I just want to highlight your podcast, The Jewelry District, that you do together with Victoria Gamelski, put out there from JCK Online. It's been a great podcast, and it seems to me you've done more of those during lockdown than you were doing before. Is that correct?
We did more interviews. Like we used to do half of it. It used to be kind of lighter, and now it's more, we try to keep it more serious and more kind of focused on advice and kind of more businessy. And it used to be half of it being Victoria talking, and we're going to probably get back to that, but it's definitely become more business focused.
Okay, thanks. And thinking about these controversies that we've been part of, COVID and Black Lives Matter, Rachel, from your perspective, is it better to be silent on these issues or to speak out?
Absolutely not to be silent. I think that's a mistake that a lot of people have made, is not to say anything at all, because perhaps, if you're not a Black person, you feel it's not your place to comment on these things. But I think it was a real moment of solidarity, and I think everyone came together. There's many sort of layers to this, and there's the danger of people just kind of jumping on it as a marketing opportunity and just doing it because they feel they should be seen to do it. But I think absolutely, I don't know, I've written quite a bit about this, and I've spoken to lots of Black jewelers, and what they've said is they want people to get involved in the conversation. You are going to make mistakes along the way, and that's okay, because this is a process. It's just about actually, if we all start having these conversations, then we can maybe move towards, changing things, maybe going towards a bit more diverse history or diverse future.
Yeah, great. Rob?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with Rachel. I mean, we try to avoid, especially right now in the United States, politics is so overwhelming. It's all we hear about, and people have such strong opinions, and you're not really, you know, going to change people's minds. It's not necessarily our place to try to change people's minds. We do, you know, as far as some of these other things, I mean, I do think it is our place to play a constructive role as far as encouraging Black designers and you know, this new association, which I think is a great idea. It probably should have happened decades ago. So I think, you know, we have a role to play as far as encouraging diversity in the industry, and we haven't necessarily stayed silent on these things. But you know, it's not a, you know, we're not a political blog, which I think is good. And, you know, sometimes we get all sorts of crazy comments that just go on and on and on. And it's just kind of a waste. It's kind of a time suck. And, you know, we hear a lot about Israel. I mean, you know, people will comment about all sorts of stuff. And that's not necessarily, I feel, appropriate for what we're doing. So we just try to let it, we will comment, and as far as it affects the jewelry industry, but it's delicate, and you know, it can kind of overwhelm everything, and that's not necessarily what we want to do. I mean, we're about selling jewelry.
Yeah, and you mentioned an association, Rob. Maybe you can pop that into the chat box while we continue the conversation, so people are aware of that new association that started up in the US to have more diversity. Avi, you had a point.
Yeah, just on the point of not being silent. You know, one thing that came up in a conversation that we had that we had with Elle Hill, who's a consultant to the jewelry industry, and she made an important point that it's not okay to be silent, but it's okay to say that you don't know, you know, and that you don't understand, and that you're here to learn. And I think that applies to, she was talking to jewelry companies, but I think it applies to everyone, both on a company, a personal company and industry level, that to recognize that this is an issue, and our job is to then provide a platform for that learning opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you. It's nice to highlight Elle, another alumni of these panel discussions here with the Jewelry Industry Voices. But Sumit, if I can turn to you, and when we're thinking about controversies, really in India, the main issue has been around the plight of migrant workers. How has the industry been supporting them, and what's been the role of jewelry business in that social problem?
Yes, in India, the migrant labor has been an issue, you know, and but the jewelry industry has really taken care of the laborers. So GJPC, which is the Gem and Jewelry Export Promotion Council, the largest trade body in India, and has actually already helped about 13,000 migrant laborers with financial aid, and it's already in the process, and by end of next month, it will reach to 25,000. Gem and Jewelry Council is another domestic council. It has already helped about 7,500 with financial aid and a lot of ration. A lot of large retailers like Tanishq have actually ran campaigns. Like, you know, there's a campaign called Blessed Gold or Dua Ka Sona. It's on YouTube. You can check this campaign out. It's beautiful, where they have actually emphasized on empathy and goodness during the pandemic, and actually went out with community kitchens, helping their children with you know, school aids, financial aids, a lot of things, like masks and social distancing norms, webinars and teachings to these people. So they have also helped people to go back home, you know, proper transportation. So the industry has really come together across the country to help them, and it has been a serious effort, and which is an ongoing effort, which is going on, and I think it will continue for the next 6 months till December 31st. So
right.
Nobody will be left, you know, on their own. The industry is there for them.
Okay, thank you. So we're busting through the hour mark as usual, and the conversation is still flowing. And I did really want to have a chat with you about how the trade press has changed over the years. Rob, you've probably been in this game the longest of everybody in terms of being a journalist. I don't want to call you a veteran because we're still young men. But how would you describe the transformation that you've seen in the field of jewelry industry reporting since you started?
Well, probably me and Steve can argue about who's been in the longest. We can fight it out there. Yeah, I think it's, well, I mean, obviously online was not a factor. I think, you know, look, in the beginning, you know, I was working at a national jeweler, and there was a gem person, there was a watch person, there was a retail person, and there was a diamond person. JCK, where I eventually went, had the same kind of setup, and we don't really have that. We don't see a lot of coverage now of gemstones and pearls, and we see some of watches just because kind of consumer media has gotten very interested in that topic. But I think there's less of that kind of specialized reporting on these sectors. And I think these sectors are extremely important because a lot of the kind of social issues that we talk about with diamonds and with gold are also very prevalent in gemstones in particular. So in that way, it's become kind of less specialized. It's become, what I do like about the current situation is become more of a conversation that I can write something. I mean, it's hard to even remember, but I used to write something and, you know, it would come out 3 weeks later, and then, you know, I would get feedback. But right now I can write something, put it out there, get feedback, respond, kind of, you know, adjust my thinking or you know, better get a sense of my thinking. So that the immediate feedback is extremely helpful, and it's more of a, I would say, it's more of a dialogue right now.
Yeah.
between us and the trade, which I think is great. I actually enjoy that aspect of it. I don't love what everybody has to say, but that's another issue.
Well, I see that a lot in your writing, that the comments section of the JCK articles is very active, and you're also very active in that as well. So Rachel, from your perspective as well, I mean, there's been this rise in social media and blogging and vlogging and influencers, and you know, there is a difference, isn't there, between a trained journalist and a blogger? And from your perspective, what goes into actually creating an original story?
Yeah, I think this is I think as journalists we get a bad rap. You know, I think people like to think of us as sort of the enemy a lot of the time, until of course they need us for something, and then, you know, and I think, but actually, and in the last few years, it's been a bit of a bugbear of mine to kind of, I think it's been so interesting watching all these influencers and everyone come along, but I think anybody now who has a laptop and an internet connection, you know, thinks that they're a journalist or a writer and will describe themselves as such, where it's just not the case. And I remember having a conversation with a well-known blogger about this, and I was like, the simple difference is that you are the story in your world, whereas like for me, like you will never see me really in my stories unless it's an opinion piece. It's like, it's about strict reporting. And I think actually I think if you're a true journalist, that's kind of how you would like approach a story, that it's very much, you know, you might speak to I don't know, for one piece I might interview, I don't know, 10 different people. They might not all make it into the story, but it's for my own, you know, peace of mind, that I know that when I say, you know, most suppliers are feeling this way, I know that I've spoken to a decent amount of people to do that. I think if you're writing a blog, sometimes, you know, if you speak to one person, you've got an opinion, and, you know, you put that forward as fact. And I just think there's a lot more work perhaps that goes into a story that might take you 2 minutes to read. You know, that's not necessarily how long it's taken one of us to write that.
And PR agencies, are they still valid, or should companies be going direct to jewelry journalists nowadays?
This is a hot topic at the moment, I think, because I think traditionally PR agencies charge a lot of money for you to use their services. I think there are some that do it really, really well, and if you've got the budgets to do it, I think great, go for it. There are others that are less good, and sometimes actually is that real, often it can be, you know, it might not be the most exciting story in the world, but say if I've got a really good relationship with that person and I find them really interesting and I know that other people will, then I might prioritize that. And you don't necessarily get that going through a PR agency. You know, if I ask them a question, then they have to ask their client, then their client comes back to them, they come back to me. You know, it can all get a little bit distant and also confusing. Whereas sometimes it's easier for a designer just to strike up a relationship if they have time, but obviously as your business grows you might not have time to do that. So yeah, it's a bit of a debate.
Steve, did you have a point?
Yeah, I think there's, I mean, one of the aspects, and I think sort of Rob hinted at it when he spoke about the fact over here that there used to be on the publication the watch guy and the retail guy and the colored stone guy and whatever, and it's now essentially a lot of these publications are run by a handful, sometimes like 1, 2, or 3 journalists essentially are responsible for everything. If you look at the panel over here, and I'll include myself on the panel as well, at least 3 of us, and most probably they also, given where Samit works, over here are steep, sort of deeply steeped in the diamond industry. And I wonder whether within this new sort of media format, whether the other sectors of the industry, pearls, colored gemstones, and sometimes just purely jewelry design, are getting the voice that they need to. And
it's a good point, Steve. It's a good point. Sorry to cut you off. Rob, we were talking. I'm conscious of time. Rob, we were talking about that. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, so traditionally diamonds have always had the lion's share of editorial, just because they've had the lion's share of the business, and strictly from a advertiser standpoint, more diamond companies used to advertise than let's say watch companies. Watch companies would go direct to consumer, so that kind of led a kind of move away from that kind of coverage. Do I, obviously I think that we're poorer for that, because I think that sector needs to be heard. And I think that's, and when you talk about one of the challenges that I think the trade press faces, is that the jewelry industry is changing, and that it is getting to a lot of these smaller designers who work on Instagram, and I think we have interesting information to give to these people, but we have to kind of figure out a way to kind of reach out to them more. And I think actually, I think we have a lot of bloggers who actually do a really good job, at our publication of doing that. But I think that's something that we have to kind of reorient ourselves. Like, if the jewelry industry is changing, how does that affect what we report? And even though this is not my area, how does that affect our business model?
Cool. Avi, you had a point, and then Samit afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, we just to build on what both Steve and Rob were saying, we're probably the most niche and that you can get in terms of our coverage is typically, our audience is typically a diamond trader, but we've actually made a conscious decision to put more of an emphasis on the jewelry retail side. Particularly in the COVID environment, because that's the messaging that people are looking for. That's the first signal of understanding the market and where the market is heading. So while we are quite diamond focused, I mean, certainly in our research, but if you look at our print magazine, and that's another thing that's changed within the industry, is that when I started, there were a lot more print magazines still going on, and they're not nearly as many today. But we have quite a strong focus on jewelry retail and jewelry design as well.
Yeah, Samit.
Yeah. For us, as the name suggests, the retail jeweler, we have been really focused on the business of retail, like just how we was speaking as well. From the beginning, we always realized that if we could help the retailers, because that's the final, at the B2B level, that's the final chain connect. And we have been talking about the business of retail. So whatever we do in our content, it is never news or topical or a press release published in the magazine that can go online. But in the magazine, there are stories on strategy, and especially in the COVID last 2 editions, we have had cover stories with 11 or 12 chapters on each story on how retailers are handling the situation, how B2B partnerships are now being managed, like how much data now retailer is sharing with a manufacturer to decide the future course of action, which was not happening before the pandemic, just for example, or manufacturing companies how and what they are doing to help the retailers. So everything is to focus to the retailer. Even if we have to cover a designer, we always cover a designer who is ready to work with a retailer.
Okay.
So that's the way we have been working.
Sorry to cut you off, Sumit. Rob.
Yeah, I just want to, this is going back a little while, but I remember Rachel made that comment about PR people. And yeah, I personally agree that it's always better to meet somebody face to face, you know, without this kind of bureaucratic thing of you know, dealing with a PR person. Obviously, they play a role. And where you do realize there's sometimes people will call me up and say, hey, I have this really great product. And they basically expect me to kind of write the release on it, like to kind of tell the story about it. And, you know, that's not necessarily my role, you know. So I think in, you know, when people have a difficult story to tell or not sure how to tell their story, then I think it's important to get a PR person.
Well, thank you, Rob, for that. And you've also teed up to my last question, which when I told some people that we were talking about this topic, a number of people asked me that this is the question they wanted me to ask you. How do you write the perfect press release to attract your attention? Can I ask you all to answer this? But if you can be brief, because we're busting way through our 1 hour mark and there are some interesting questions. Sumit, maybe I can start with you for what attracts your attention with a press release, briefly if you can.
Yeah. So these days, you know, the headline is very, very important because the reader online, when they comes, they have just 15 to 20 seconds to decide should they click on that news and go further. So I look at the right headline with an attractive picture. And second is the news benefiting the readers? You know, people normally send a press release talking and telling how great the company is, how great the new launch is, but what is it going to do or benefit the reader with? And
Yep.
Third is I like the release to be flexible, print, web, and social media, so that my team does not need to work on them. You know, and it has to be relevant to my core audience, you know, to the retailers. These are the 4 things which we look at.
Very useful. Rachel, if I can bring you in for that question.
I like to tell people about the triangle, which is something that I got taught when I was in training to write a news story, but I think it applies to a press release as well. So really, if you kind of think about the shape of a triangle, and at the top you have need to know, and then you broaden out into want to know, and then you keep going into nice to know. And I think that's really useful to just kind of, if you're going to attract somebody's attention, just to know straight away, if you read the first few lines, you're kind of hooked in and you kind of have all the information and you will keep reading. And also in general, just include a quote and have some great images.
Great. Rob, your perspective on this?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think it has to be useful for the readers. It hopefully has to be novel. You know, sometimes we get people who you know, we don't use a lot of their press releases and they get mad at us, and you know, they complain to my boss and stuff like that. And you know, I'm happy to talk to people about what I find interesting, what I'm looking for. It's something, you know, I'm just one person and I'm just, you know, there's other people on staff that you can pitch, but you know, you know, if something that is not necessarily interesting to me or I don't find it all that different, you know, it's not, you know, I'm sorry, but you know, it's just the way it is. So it's you know, I think we're always happy to discuss what we need, what we like, what's interesting to us, and that's it.
That's cool. Thank you. Avi, lastly for you, how to write the perfect press release?
Yeah, it's, I mean, I can only agree with everything that's been said, including the previous point that relationships are really the key to getting me to notice a press release. But if I can add something, it's that the press release should be understandable, at least. I mean, on so many occasions, and particularly on the from the diamond mining sector, and we often have a good laugh about it. And we actually wrote a piece calling them out on it. Joshua from our team wrote a piece that you know, you'll get a phone call from a PR person from the mining company asking why we haven't published the piece, and it'll have all these technical sort of descriptions of what's going on. You know, that they launched a new you know, they upgraded the X-ray density, you know, machine that no one really understands, even being in the industry for a number of years. And so if a company wants their story to be written, it should be simple to understand. You know, as a journalist, when we're writing, I was always told to write for my grandmother.
Yeah.
You know, so that she understands it. And probably the same applies to a press release, that it should just flow beautifully and be just written in layman's terms. For the miners, I understand that they have to do it sometimes for the financial markets, but it doesn't help our cause.
Thank you. Listen, we've busted well through the hour, but there are some interesting questions in the Q&A box. Some of them that have been asked, I feel that we've already addressed them, but there is one here from Stefan Fischler, which it would be completely inappropriate of me if I didn't put it to you guys. Hello, Stefan. Thanks for joining us. Stefan asks, retailers rely on so-called independent opinions related to grading. What is the panelist opinion on grading automation that would potentially strengthen consumer perception of retailers' expertise? Rob, I see yourself unmuting. You've got an opinion on this, I'm sure.
No, I think it's a good thing. I think the question is you could run into the same issue that you have with labs, is that, you know, some machines might be tougher graders, some machines might be weaker graders, and you know, obviously we don't want to put a lot of people out of work, but yeah, I think that's probably the future of the business.
Avi, what do you think?
Yeah,
about
well, I think it fits into the trend to making the supply chain more efficient, and that's something that I believe is going to be a legacy of the coronavirus crisis. That technology is more accessible to people. They know how to use. They're learning how to use it, and are understanding that it's something that can enhance your business, and it's something that can enhance the entire supply chain. I think we're going to see more automation across the pipeline, including from the mining and rough sales side. Certainly in grading, you know, I think all the major graders are involved in creating an automation of their systems, and that's only going to feed into a more efficient pipeline, and that's ultimately, I think, where we're heading.
And Samit, you were involved with DMCC in setting up diamond grading facilities through IDL. Where do you stand with automation in diamond grading?
It is very important. You know, I think technology is a great enabler for the grading business, and the faster we accept this and get the entire lab business in one platform, it will really help the consumer. See, at the end of it, we have to think of the final consumer. What the consumer feels and what he or she wants is that it should be a grading system which is acceptable globally, and even if they move country to country, it should be useful for them. You know, rather than having independent labs giving independent different opinions. So technology is a must, and I think we are moving towards that direction now.
Okay, thanks. Just one more last question. We did spend quite a lot of time talking about trade shows, but we've got a question here from Maya Dave in Canada, and thinking about the trade shows, she says, you know, Maya, I don't know if it's she or he, apologies, but Maya says it should really be jewelry shows, you know, because many people now are selling direct to the public. Can you comment on these blurring lines between the trade and selling to the public? Rachel, I'd like to put that to you, especially with your Jewelry Cut Live, that, you know, some of the people who are coming, of course, are not trade, they're consumers coming to your events.
Yeah, from the very start, we wanted to make it a hybrid event. So the idea was, because it supports smaller independent designers, that they pay sort of a low fixed fee and they come and they get to sell to the public, they get to meet buyers, they get to meet press, they kind of get a little bit of everything. But for us, it's kind of been one of the most exciting elements of it, is seeing people actually, just consumers, come in and start to understand jewelry and buy jewelry and see what they're interested in. And I think the trade very much wants to separate between consumer and trade. And sometimes I don't think that separation there's not this hard wall that perhaps some people think there is. I think, to go back to what we've spoken before about social media, if you've got a jeweler, you know, we all watch videos of people at the bench making things, and so do consumers. You can't stop people seeing things on the internet. So I think now there shouldn't be such a division between trade and consumer in that sense. And also, I think it's helpful for consumers because the more they know about jewelry, the more they're likely to justify spending that bit more money on fine jewelry. So I think it can only be a good thing that benefits the trade.
Thank you. We've bussed right through the time allotted for this. Thank you for staying with us, but the conversation from my perspective has been very productive. If I can just talk about what we're doing next week. Next week, we will be digging down into the data. We will be analyzing the analysts and crunching the data with an expert panel of diamond industry analysts. Please join us same time next week, same place wherever you are. Registration can be done via CIBJO's website, cibjo.org/webinars. And if you are receiving CIBJO's emails, you will be receiving that as well. Thinking about CIBJO webinars, please also consider the next home gemology webinar, co-hosted by me, but mainly hosted by the magnificent Rui Galopim de Carvalho, who is still on holiday in Torre del Greco, but is still providing you with expert gemological information. Next week, we're going to be inviting Jeremy Shepherd, another alumni of this webinar, and he's going to be come on to talking about freshwater cultured pearls. That was a topic that many people asked about when we were discussing saltwater cultured pearls a couple of weeks back. So that's at 2 o'clock Lisbon and London time. Again, there's the website up on the screen, how you can register. And finally, please, we all need to be liked. We all need to build up our databases. Please subscribe to CIBJO's mailing list. Just send us an email address and we'll pop you onto the list so you get all the information. And please like us on the different social media platforms we're on. Gaetano, I would love to let you have the final word again, if that's okay with you.
Thank you very much, Edward. Again, I switch off my camera because I want to listen very careful and enjoy every single word our incredible panelists have said. And honestly, I like to hear what I heard, the story which is behind your job. Thank you very much for that. And again, I would like to stress one single fact, which is very important to me. Without you, my job, our job in the industry, is useless. So we thank you for bringing to the people what we do. And this I learned nearly 40 years ago in the United States, first time, when at that time, old journalist, he was working for the New York Times at the time. He told me, said, if you do something and you do not communicate, don't do it. It's a wasting of time. So I want to thank you for your great activity and for let us be known around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gaetano. So thank you very much, Gaetano, to you and to Steve for facilitating and supporting these webinars. Thank you very much to my panelists, Rob, Rachel, Avi, and Samit. We really appreciate your time. We've bust right through the hour, so you've given us a lot of your time, and we're very, very grateful for it. The conversation has been stimulating. And finally, thank you to everybody who's joined and has joined throughout the series that we've been running. Just to let you know that next week's webinar with the analysts, we'll be taking a break after that through August, but we'll be coming back better and stronger in September. So wishing you all a good week, wishing you all staying safe. Thank you to everybody, and especially thank you to our panelists. Stay safe, everybody. I should have said, I shall be leaving the webinar open. So if people wish to read through the chat where there's some useful links and information posted, I won't be turning the video off. I won't be turning the webinar off. I'm just turning the microphones and the cameras off so people can stay a little bit and read through the chat. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Bye-bye.